Hello and welcome to the Can't Believe podcast. My name's Dan Rolinson. I'm joined by two very special guests this afternoon. It's Frankie Maguire and Rob Warner joining me as we're going to do part 2 of Aston Villa Confessions. Now, we filmed the first one of these in person. Me, James Rushton and John Townley reacted to a load of anonymous Aston Villa confessions about all sorts of things. If you've not seen part 1, you can click here, I think, to go and find it. It'll also be on our channel, on our Spotify page, etc. You can go and find that, listen to part 1. Part 2 is more of the same. We had loads of confessions the first time around, so we saved some to do a part 2 if people enjoyed it, and I think people did. First up is, I really liked Stephen Ireland, but for reasons I can't fully comprehend. I can't think of any real positive, apart from he was actually pretty good on my FIFA career.
Yeah, I remember being quite excited when he signed and thinking that we might be getting a fairly, not a good deal, because it wasn't, but you know, it might soften the blow a little bit. And I think even if he was good on FIFA, it just wouldn't have made any difference. Because on a FIFA camera, you'd just be like a regen or something anyway, even if he'd got his real appearance. He was so indicative of everything about that era, it makes me feel sad.
We lost 6-0, I think it was, to Newcastle in his first game. And I remember the look on his face after about the 6th goal went in, just looking at the sky as if, what have I let myself in for here? And that was a feeling shared by most of the Villa fans for the next few years after that. And to be honest, because, you know, my whole family's Irish as well, so I also follow Ireland as well as England. And I remember quite a few random stories with him with Ireland as well, something to do with grandparents who might not have passed away, who apparently did, to avoid international duty. So he was a very naturally gifted player. And I was quite excited at the thought of him coming to Villa at the time, but it just didn't work out, did it? It did well at City, but at Villa it just didn't work out.
Just as an aside for that, have either you had any standout affiliations with a particular player or a particular club because of a FIFA career mode or a Football Manager save or anything like that? Does anything jump out as like a soft spot for a player?
Do you know what? Leon Bailey, before he signed for Villa. Yeah, because I play a reasonable amount of FIFA. And Bailey at Leverkusen was always red hot just because he was so quick. And so I started to then like him in real life as well. And then we signed him and I was dead excited. And obviously for the first 2.5 years, he was nowhere near as good as he was on FIFA. And now he's better than he is on FIFA. So,
yeah, I was at uni and with Pro Evo was there, and from 2005 to 2008, I played as FC Copenhagen quite a lot just to sort of rub it into my housemates that I might be a little bit better than they were at it. So they'd be like Barcelona or Bayern Munich, whatever. And then they had a player called Hutchinson. I think it was Atiba Hutchinson, maybe, a sort of Canadian player. And I used to call him the Hutch, and I'd just always run down the wing with him, beat all the players, score with him, and he became this sort of like house legend that I still refer to this day. And then when I saw he was still playing for Canada at the age of 40 in the World Cup, I was absolutely in raptures. It was just, yeah. So he's sort of like a cult icon for me, the Hutch.
Awesome. Good choice.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. And welcome to Aston Villa Confessions. These are the tangents we will go on for the rest of this episode. Who knew that we were going to be talking about these kind of things? All right. Second one I've got here is honestly depressing, to be honest, but we'll try and spin it as best we can. I hope I don't have to worry about this for years to come, but I fear what post Unai Emery Aston Villa will look like. I hope it's not like post Martin O'Neill was, but on the plus side, we have way better owners than we did back then or ever.
You know, every club that loses a big talismanic manager, there is a bit of a drop off after it usually. Not always, but most of the time. And we have put a lot of power into his hands. We've built a lot around him with an infrastructure with Monchi, Vidagani. There's a big Spanish contingent in the coaching staff as well. So that, you know, for Emery to go as the sort of head of the table, that would probably take quite a bit of getting used to, I think. But I'm hoping the club are future-proofing themselves in the sense that, you know, we do have better owners than we did, you know, during the O'Neill era. And, you know, we're aiming to sign quite young players as we're seeing this transfer window. The academy's there. So I just sort of think that hopefully were Emery to ever go, you know, in 50 years, hopefully, after a long spell of success, and he's lived to the age of 120 or whatever, you know, that I think that hopefully we've sort of future-proofed ourselves. That's the way to sort of put it, and that we've prepared for that eventuality to happen one day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, really. I mean, on the one hand, I agree with the confessor that Yeah, it does feel
Is
a bit.
confessor the right word, by the way? I also said that.
Yeah, why not?
Confessor.
Edward the Confessor, we'll have it. So I don't know if it was anybody called Edward that sent it in, obviously. But yeah, I sometimes feel like that, but more, I guess, is it a false dawn? Are the wheels going to fall off more than... And even though his track record speaks for itself, the players are clearly very talented, just the fact that they can do what they've been doing this season and last season. So, pointless. I think I've said before, I think on the podcast, that Unai is actually a couple of months younger than Dean Smith, and I always thought of Dean Smith as being a young manager. So potentially, assuming everyone's happy with the way things are going, I don't know where he goes from Villa Park.
Yeah.
Other than 20, 30 years time when he's in his early 80s, he unveils his own statue and that's it, hands over the keys to Ashley Young or whoever to step in and continue the legacy.
Onto a manager that I was before my time, so I'm going to come to you both for this one and not offer any opinion whatsoever. John Gregory is overrated as an Aston Villa manager. With the resources and players he had, he did not do well enough.
Agreed, actually. Yeah, I was thinking before, if I got asked for a confession, what would my confession be? And I don't get me wrong, as a character and as a Villa man, I absolutely love him. But yeah, my confession would have been that even when we were doing really well, so this is a double-edged confession, this. Even when we were doing really well, I would have replaced him with Glenn Hoddle.
Okay.
At the time, which would have also have been a poor choice, I think, in hindsight. But yeah, it felt like for the money that we'd spent, the players that we'd got, the drop off that we had was inexcusable.
Yeah, completely. Because it's easy to forget. I remember at the time the rhetoric was always that Doug Ellis didn't spend money, but actually during Gregory's era, we did actually spend quite a lot. Like Steve Stone, $5.5 million, player like that.
Yeah,
easy to forget.
Steve Watson, Alan Thompson,
Dion Dublin. I think he made a massive mistake leaving Villa because his managerial career never recovered, and I think he potentially could have ended up a bit of a Moyes at Everton at Villa. Like he could have been there another few years and always finished top half, pushing 7th, 8th, 6th, something like that. But yeah, just wasn't. He made a big mistake leaving Villa. But yeah, I'd agree with you. I think he probably did underachieve.
Frankie, you actually mentioned two players there in your answer for about the previous confession that are both in the next confession.
Okay.
Dion Dublin deserves the love and respect that the fans show to Juan Pablo Angel. Actually, he probably deserves it more.
I thought he was brilliant for us for a couple of seasons, particularly when we first signed him. He came in and he was fantastic. And then he got that terrible neck injury. I think it was at Sheffield Wednesday, I want to say he got it. And he wasn't really quite the same after that. It's an interesting one with Angel. And I've talked about this before with some friends where it's quite easy to forget, given the love he gets, that actually he had a couple of seasons where he was just non-existent. It was 1 year under Graham Taylor, maybe in his second season, where I don't think he barely played. And I'm not sure that was on Taylor. I don't know what that was all about. But, he was clearly a very highly talented player, Angel, and he was a very unusual player for Villa at the time because he was coming in from Argentina, South American, from Colombia, from River Plate. It was just a really unusual Aston Villa signing at the time. So he really sticks out as a bit of a trailblazer in that sense. And we didn't have too many players like that in the Premier League as a whole. So I think that's why he sticks out. And not only on top of that, he was actually a really talented striker. He just sticks out in that way, doesn't he? He's got like a bit of a cult presence. He's sort of from a unique kind of footballing background that you didn't really get in the Premier League at that time, or at Aston Villa in particular, ever until sort of recent years. Whereas Dion Dublin, I think, I really loved Dublin. I thought he was a really good striker, and I tend to agree. I think he does deserve the sort of level of love that we do give to Angel as well. I think he was a great servant for Villa, Dublin, and yeah, I still like him as a character. I think he's a good representative, off the pitch as well, if he ever wanted to do that. So yeah, I tend to agree with that assessment.
I feel like we might have to change the name of this podcast from Confessions to just Straight Up Truths. Because I also agree. I think, again, Angel was one that I loved him and I wanted to love him because it was the closest we'd come to what at the time was a big money signing that would make a difference. It seemed to take forever for his work permit to to come through. He came in as a bit of an unknown quantity and a big money one at that. And he had some really good spells and scored some really good goals. And then at other times he had quite long spells of kind of flattering to deceive. Yeah, I think he's potentially the Villa player equivalent of the round badge. People look back with rose-tinted glasses, and if it was presented to us in the cold light of day today as being a brand new thing, everyone would turn their nose up at it.
Rob, you said this video could be called Aston Villa Truths rather than Confessions, but I'd be absolutely amazed if either of you two and most people out there in the comments agreed with the following one. The Holt End is the worst stand at Villa Park. Come on, Rob, don't tell me about
not as long as the North stands there, surely.
Well, yeah.
It's like, I'm convinced the North stand's like 95% asbestos. Legal disclaimer, I've got no proof of that.
The Holt End is one of the best stands, not only at Villa Park, but in my opinion, one of the best individual stands across the Premier League. To say it's the worst stand at Villa Park is baffling to me.
Can't agree with that. It's where all the atmosphere comes from in it. So that it's the heart and soul of Villa Park. And as you say, as long as the North Stand stands, I feel like it'll be, if a nuclear fallout happens, it'll be cockroaches and the North Stand survive it. Basically, it's never going away. Is it? I think the North Stand probably takes that one. Though I do have affection for it. Don't get me wrong. I still sit in there. But it's the one stand you think this could do with a big improvement, couldn't it?
Next one then. People only think Larsson and Mellberg were better than Southgate and Ekiog because of how the latter two left the club. Looking at it with an objective football brain, that is clearly nonsense. And I absolutely loved Larsson and Mellberg. I also loved Larsson and Mellberg, and when I'm doing like my Aston Villa best 11s that I've seen, they're always in there. It's like a Premier League era. They're always the centre-backs I pick. I sometimes put Mellberg at right back. So, Rob, I'll come to you first. Is that true? Is this a good confession or not?
A bit of a mixed bag, this one, I think. Mellberg was a really good defender for us, really good. And he does stand up against defenders that we've had in the past. I think Larsson was a cut above, and I know it's not a nice thing to say, and it's a very Villa thing to say, but similar to Paul Maguire, if he'd not had those knee injuries, I don't think he would have been a Villa player, certainly not at that time. There's a reason he was a central defender at AC Milan in that period, and that's the level he was operating at. Larsson, we managed to keep him fit, and he was straight out the top drawer. Really, really good footballer. Southgate and Hugo, I think out of the two of them, Southgate was good, and he was almost a bit of a pioneer in terms of making that transition from midfield into defence and being a bit of a ball-playing defender. I feel like his best time at the club, though, was when he was part of three central defenders with Hugo and Paul Maguire. Anybody playing in defence next to Paul Maguire's got instantly at least 20% less work to do. Whereas Hugo, I think, was... If I was going to put them in order, it'd probably be Larsson, Hugo, Mellberg, Southgate.
So a mixed bag is the correct answer. You've got them in like tiers of each other rather than too good, too bad.
I agree. I think Larsson was one of the best defenders I've ever seen in my life. I think he was an absolutely amazing player. And you're right, there's a reason he was at AC Milan at that time when, Serie A had the best defences going, really. And he just struck me as a player that kind of had everything really that you would want as a manager. Like, he had an amazing attitude, but also just his reading of the game, his physicality, use of the ball, everything. And it was that one special season, was there, I think, under O'Leary and maybe O'Neill. It was one season where he got fit and was able to play pretty much most games, and then the knee injury just got him in the end. But he was a fantastic player for Villa. He really was. And but yeah, then I think it's kind of close between the other three. And I think you're right about Southgate. I kind of forgot, he was a midfielder at Crystal Palace and then came to Villa and stepped back into defence. And yeah, he was kind of more of probably today, he'd probably do really, really well as a central defender. He'd probably be like a Pep Guardiola, be falling over trying to get him into City or something, because he was quite a ball-playing defender. And Ekiog as well. I remember we used to sing Hugo for England all the time at Villa Park, because again, it was like it is today. When a Villa player doesn't get picked by England, we take it as a personal attack, really, don't we? It's just frustrating. And Hugo was he was good enough for England. He was again a top defender. But I think I'd just have to go with Larsson Mellberg solely because Larsson was just that. he was pushing towards Maguire level. I think he was that good.
Next one is there's a couple here that are a little bit longer, a little bit of story time for how I became Villa fans, that kind of thing. I'd like to confess how I became an Aston Villa fan. About 15 years ago, my adult football league captain / team sponsor here in Chicago said we all needed white shorts to go with our claret and blue kits he had splashed his music venue name across. He's a West Ham expat, so he trained in Hammer shorts all the time. So I went looking online for something similar. I found Villa shorts instead, read all about the great history of the club and fell in love. Bought the shorts, delightfully miffed the skipper by telling him I was a long-time Villa supporter. I joined the local Villa Lions Club weekly in polishing off a full English at the Globe pub, and the rest is history. Quite like how there's always like a little underlying story to these things.
Yeah. I'm all up for people supporting Villa just to be spiteful to fans of Villa.
Yeah.
Bring it on.
Yeah, I feel like I've been spiting my dad my whole life because he's a Blues fan. So I've been his biggest nightmare going is that I'm such a huge Aston Villa fan. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned Blues because they come up in the next confession. Again, a similar story about supporting the club from a young age. Back in 2002, I was 13 years old. 2002, what was I? I was 7 in 2002. What were you?
I was 23.
16.
16. Okay, all right, you're closer here. Frankie, this could have been you. I went to the Millennium Stadium to watch Birmingham City in the playoff final with my blue-nosed dad and uncle. Frankie, is this you?
It actually, I genuinely did go with my blue-nosed dad and my uncle. This isn't me.
Wow, okay, interesting.
Yeah,
they even painted my nose blue, and embarrassingly, there was a photo that gets circulated on my birthdays. My dad got a job working for the Villa in 2004. I used to go to all the Villa games for years, and I've been a Villa fan ever since. I now live and breathe Aston Villa, and I'm completely obsessed. So again, I feel like there's a bit of an undertone of spite in that one as well about got into Villa, now I'll go because the rest of the family aren't. But that picture of being painted in blue. Have you ever had anything like that?
Well, when I was really, really young, like my earliest memories in life young, I remember me and my sister standing in a room and my dad walked in and said, "Do you know what team God supports?" And we were like, "Who?" And he said, "Birmingham City." So genuinely, in my early years, I believed that God supported Birmingham City, like as in that was his chosen team. And then it wasn't until I was about 5 or 6 and my mom's family, my mom and all the Villa connections there and all my mates at school were Villa fans, and my dad was like a lonely island of Blues that no one else supported them that we knew. So I turned to I was sort of like reverse Darth Vader, turning from the dark side to the light side. But yeah, so for the first couple of years of my life, I genuinely was of the belief that I'd go to mass every week thinking that God supported Blues. So yeah.
Wow, that's remarkable.
Yeah.
Did you never think to ask the priest like why God was so pernicious in making them that bad?
It's punishment, isn't it? You got to suffer and all that.
Next up is a Swedish Villa fan here for 40 years, but it could have been very different. Here is my story. When I started playing football at age 7, my club organised an internal kick-around tournament for all the kids. English football was big in Sweden, so we all got names after clubs in the highest division. I was put into one team, and when my parents were travelling to London, all I wanted was for them to bring home a jersey from that team. Luckily, my parents weren't that educated, since the team I was asked to play for was West Ham. They instead came home with a Villa jersey. It was a simple choice after that which team I had to support, and I'm grateful for their mistake to this very day.
Wow.
I find it so interesting of how people get involved with the club again at West Ham.
I feel like I've read that confession before, either on Twitter or on Villa Talk. We would have been the reigning European champions when that shirt was purchased.
That's true. Yeah, easy to get into the club, isn't it, when they're at the top?
So I think the parents knew what they were up to, because the other thing is it would have quite clearly had Aston Villa FC written on it.
Maybe they just thought it was time for a bit of an intervention. Let's go back to some more on the pitch matters then. This next one says, if Bayern Munich or an equivalent big size club came in for Emi Martinez this summer offering a top shelf price, I'd take it.
I think there's going to be a big sale this summer, but that's not the end of the world. I think we can use that money to go and expand the squad further, just because of FFP considerations, which all Premier League clubs seem to be focusing on now. But Emi Martinez, I would be very, very reluctant to see him go, just because I think he is genuinely irreplaceable. I personally do have him as the best keeper in the world. For me, or if you were to go, who's the best distributor of the ball in world football as a goalkeeper? Ederson probably takes that one. But when it comes to shot stopping, I think Emi Martinez, I don't think there's anyone who is better than him. And I think that with the high line we play, there's a lot of games this season where I could think of teams getting through one-on-one against him. Calvert-Lewin at the weekend, Chilwell, I think Sterling for Chelsea, a couple of months ago. And he's just his mere presence and aura saves those shots. And he is adding so many points to us as a team every season when he's with us, because he's saving so many goals that other keepers just wouldn't. So I'd be very, very reluctant to see Emi Martinez go, if I'm honest.
We talk about like a big sale and whatnot, and whether that's this summer or not. You do feel like that's going to have to happen at some point because of the financial restrictions that are in place now in the Premier League. If you had to kind of like pick top 3 or bottom 3, I suppose it is, of who you would least like to lose, Martinez would be top for me of the player that I think is one we can't replace. It's such an important position that you have to get the next one right. So he'd be like top of my list or bottom of my list for who I'd want to lose. If you had to pick 2 or 3 of players that you think we can't do without, who stands out?
I mean, Emi definitely. It's interesting though, when you first read the thing out, I was thinking, I perhaps could see him going. And then the more Frankie was talking, I was like, what it brought to mind was he's almost to us what Schmeichel was to that United team. Presence is the right word, because Calvert-Lewin bearing down on Robin Olsen, just around the stadium and everything, the collective mind frame of everybody in Goodison Park is he's got to beat Emi Martinez now. And, it's a big deal. He's just got that aura about him. I think Dougie would be another one that I'd be loath to lose, probably just because of how far he's come on. And I'm intrigued to see how far he will get on as the players around him get better and he can focus more on what he's good at and less at having to do the bits around the edges. I'd probably have those as my top 2.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it kind of leads me into the next confession pretty swiftly. Jack Grealish being sold was the best thing to happen to Aston Villa at that time. At the time, it felt gutting. How are we going to replace him? Who comes in? He's pivotal to us. He's the captain, the talisman, and as much as it was expected to most people that move was coming at some point, we obviously got a world record fee at the time, I think it was anyway, or for a British player, whatever it was, 100 million. It did feel like not the end of the world, but of course we could be in trouble here because we rely on him so heavily. Just off the back of the last one about who do we least want to lose, if we were to lose Douglas Luiz this summer, for example, I'm not saying that's going to happen, for 100 million, I wouldn't feel the same way about losing somebody now that I did 2 or 3 seasons ago.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was probably the natural evolution of the club, though, anyway. I think we would still be a far better team than we were then, even if Grealish had stayed. Because to your point, I don't think it's just the Grealish funds that made the difference, because the players that came in, the fact that we brought 3 to replace 1 was always weird, because I didn't think that the Premier League were going to start letting us have 13 players on the field. What probably made it worse was all the moments that we had with him coming through the youth team, getting punched against Blues and scoring the winner, scoring his back post was a header against Blues at Villa Park, and all those sorts of things that were it was like losing a limb, really. Whereas now I think there's the trust in the in the management setup of the club, but also for me, I think to get an attachment like that with a player, that was. Yes, he's not perhaps reached the heights individually at Manchester City that perhaps most of us thought he might have done. But in terms of coming through the youth team, a generational talent. There's no 2 ways about it. And a Villa fan to boot. He's not a generational talent that we've bought from, Sparta Rotterdam when he was 15 or something. He was genuinely a Villa supporter all his life, so it naturally made it a bit different.
I think you're right about Grealish. It was. There's a picture of me on the day that the bid from Man City came in, holding a red wine and a beer at the same time, staring into the distance. I was absolutely devastated. I loved him like a son. I'm from Solihull as well, and same sort of very similar background, very same schooling, really. So it was almost like somebody had written a Hollywood script of how I could dream my life. And it was like Jack Grealish was actually living it, right to the point where you get punched by a Blues fan and then score the winner in front of the Villa fans at St Andrews. It was like, this cannot get any better. And then the goal against West Ham on the final day, to keep us up. And I don't think I've ever gone more insane at a goal in my life. And so just the magic of the player, like he had such magic, which you just don't see at City anymore with him. It was big to lose that. And I think as time goes by, times are healing and all that. I think one day he'll come back in a fan capacity or whatever, and we'll all be like, oh, it's great to see Grealish again. But I don't know. Yeah, I think it probably, thinking about it, and I hate to think about it in like a really boring financial sense, but FFP wise, it was probably really good to get 100 million quid from an academy player, and then use that to reinvest. And as you say, it's almost like it got to the point where he had to move on, really, I guess, to fulfill whatever ambitions he had that we just were never going to be able to do, at least for another few years. So yeah, fair enough.
The next one kind of actually ties in nicely with the Jack Grealish being sold one from before. They say there is too much emotional attachment to players. There are several members of the squad who are excellent but are seen as irreplaceable. I think Emery and Monchi could cause some upset in the near future as they look to upgrade and bring down the squad's average age. Mings, McGinn, Buendia, Ramsey, Bailey, Watkins, maybe even Kamara and Louise, all absolutely fabulous players for us, but realistically, hardly at a consistent title challenging level, and in most cases, lack of time to grow to that level. I love the squad and our team, but I can see there being a lot of heartache in the near future.
That's I sort of need to consider and ponder that for a while. That's a very interesting confession, as good as Usher's Confessions. Great tune from many years ago. There is a bit of an emotional attachment to some of these players, possibly more so than we've had in the past, just because of the sense that you've got players like McGinn and Mings who have sort of guided us up from the Championship, or helped guide us up from the Championship, been there through some dark times and some, helped fight to keep us up. So they're a permanent reminder of, the fallen giants getting back onto their feet. I don't think McGinn's going anywhere for a long time. I think he's here to stay. And I think he's good enough to stay. And I think he's good enough to get us into Champions League. I think he's a brilliant football player. The type of player who I think Alex Ferguson would have signed for Man United back in the day. Exactly that profile player. Mings, with the injury, that will be interesting to see how that develops. We all really hope he comes back and, can get back to playing again. But, we'll see how that one develops. And I don't know. I don't think there's a player that's a bit like a Grealish, where he went in, it felt like your heart had been torn out. Well, it did for me at least. But I don't think there's any players that I'd be massively emotionally attached to where I think I can't, I'm going to need to take a week's holiday here to get over it. I think if we lost a player like Emi Martinez, I am emotionally attached to him because I think he's a great player and I just love the man. But I'd be gutted to lose him in the sense that he's of the player he is, and how hard it'd be to replace him. But there's no one emotionally that I'd feel, I can't lose this guy, because I do think with Monchi and Emery that I'd be quite actually excited to see what they might do to then replace that.
Yeah, I think I'd perhaps go the other way with that a little bit. There wouldn't be the raw emotional attachment that I had with when Jack left, but I definitely think I like a lot of the current squad, not just because they're doing good things for us, but they seem to be fully bought into our football club. And people like Ian Mings and Martinez joined us when we weren't on top. Even Dougie, even Kamara. You can say it with all of them. We weren't really on top, and they've committed themselves to it when some of them were outperforming the club. To be honest, and could have bailed out. And we've seen so many players over the last 10 or 15 years that just they weren't bought into it. They were just phoning it in. So I think from that perspective, I'd feel disappointed. But I'd also like to think that what we're seeing now is the standard of what we're going to get going forward, is people that are coming in and are bang up for it.
The thing that kind of throws me a little bit in that was the line, realistically, hardly any of these are at a consistent title challenging level, and in most cases lack the time to get to that level. This might make me look stupid here. Obviously, I want Villa to win the league, right? We all do. Winning the Premier League will be madness. I want us to win it year after year, of course. Are we disappointed if that's not the level? I don't know if I can phrase this in the way without making me look like an idiot, but like if we're not title challengers and we haven't got title challenger level players, that we should be upset with that. Because these players are good enough to be top 4 players consistently year after year, I think. Is that not, I don't want to say good enough, because obviously you should always aspire to be the best. Is that not good enough?
Well,
I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I think as a
I'm going to be happy
club,
with my football club unless they're a title challenger. I still love the club, still support them if they're a top 6 club, top 4 club.
Yeah, and that's the sort of spoiled rubbish that I would hope we hadn't got to that point already. Part of it comes down to how they gel as a team. It's so much more than just let's get in all these amazing players. I mean, there are some players in that team who are great for us.
Yeah.
May not be, as much as Matty Cash for me would be the first player I'd replace. But I also don't think he would be as good as he is for us at other clubs. I think, this is potentially his zenith. Yeah, I don't think I agree on getting pitch invasion off my little boy.
Let's move on then past our pitch invader. No punches were thrown this time. I've got a couple left. This one's such a short one. I don't know why I've included it, really. Libor Kozak was a brilliant footballer. Big heavy lifting there on the word brilliant, in my opinion.
I'm trying to look at his stats. What was he brilliant? He was a striker. I think his highest scoring season. Sparta Prague got 14 in 31. But otherwise, there's lots of zeros, 4, 0, 3, 4, 0.
Yeah, he did well in the Europa League for Lazio before we signed him, didn't he?
In fairness, I think he got 4 in 14 for Villa. And then he got that knee injury. So it's a little bit of a Wesley-ish scenario where you're like, what could it be?
Yeah.
If he hadn't had that knee injury, could he have maybe just continued to improve? And who knows? But I don't know. I don't think he was brilliant.
I remember when he made his comeback from injury. And I was watching a game. I don't even know if it was his first game back, but I was watching a game and there was like a sprint through the middle of the pitch, through the centre circle, and there was him and a defender. And it just got to a point where it was as if somebody had sneakily just put a treadmill under his feet. And he was just like running on the spot, like at the start of Scooby-Doo, and the defender was just going for it. And I was like, oh, this is not going to work out at all.
Every so often we'll get a YouTube comment saying that I look like Libor Kozak, and it's not happened for a while. So this will now probably set that off again. Got a big nose, haven't I? That's basically it, really.
And he was about 8 feet tall as well.
Yeah, I'm not that. I'm not skinny, lanky. I'm not that at all. So I've got a big nose, probably got similar hairlines, possibly. So that'll probably bring people out of the woodwork again that I look like Libor Kozak. I stand by my conviction that Ashley Westwood was a good player in a poor Villa side, and in a team of good players, he would have shone with his ability.
I'd say he was a good player. I'd go as far as saying
he was a good
player. Yeah. I think when he left the Villa, he carried on playing at the level that he was probably at. I think he was a 7 out of 10 at everything. I would say, whether that was pace, defending, picking a pass. Perhaps wasn't a 7 out of 10 at scoring goals. So yeah, generally he was all right. And at his best, he might be an 8 out of 10 on the day, and at his worst, he might be a 4. And typically, he was somewhere in between the two. But yeah, he was all right. I think he might have shone a bit more in a better team.
I've got my own pitch invader now. For those that listen, my son has decided to join me while my fiance has a week. I've been nap-trapped for a while with him sleeping on her. When Liverpool played Aston Villa under Steven Gerrard away from home, I hated Gerrard so much that I put a bet on Liverpool and wanted them to win so Gerrard would get the sack. I've never done that before or since.
Absolutely fair enough.
Have you ever done anything like that, either of you two? Kind of like bet against the Villa because you wanted a manager to go or anything like that?
I couldn't do it. The Fulham game away, you could feel the momentum was building for Gerrard to go. And there was a part of me that thought it might just be better if this ends how we think it might end tonight, and that he just gets out the club. And then when he ended 3-0, I was like, I think he's going to be gone tomorrow, but he was gone within an hour, wasn't he? So I've never bet against Villa, but there have been 1 or 2 games. I think O'Leary as well might have annoyed me a fair bit. I think there's been one or two games where I thought, yeah, it might be better for everybody involved if this doesn't quite go how I normally would want it to go.
I've bet against the Villa, but I did it for an ulterior motive, because very early on as a Villa supporter, I went to see us away at Sheffield United. I was about 15 or something. I got a mate who was a Sheffield United season ticket holder, and so I went in their home end with him, and I had a bet on, I think I had Matthias Breitkreutz or something to score at any time, and he didn't even play. So I don't know what I was thinking. That day, I put a few bets on, and they were all ridiculous. And that very quickly taught me that anything I bet on was not going to work out. And so I very rarely gamble. When you said the Liverpool thing, I thought this might be the one, would be when we beat them 7-2. So at half time in that game, I went on to whichever betting website and put a tenner on Villa to lose, because I thought, for me, that was insurance that we weren't going to blow it. So it wasn't, I thought we were going to throw it away. It's my track record of gambling is so poor that me, that was like guaranteeing that I didn't think we were going to get 7, but that was guaranteeing that was going to end in a win for us. And it obviously worked.
That's funny. You can't hear, but it sounds like he's laughing. The final one, incidentally, involves children. When Villa have a bad result, for example, Man United on Boxing Day, a great recent example, I act like an absolute baby, and it takes me days to stop sulking. It's really embarrassing, to be honest, and my wife definitely doesn't deserve it, but I cannot help myself. I've now got 2 young kids of my own and need to set an example. So any tips or advice, greatly appreciated. We'll split this into 2 if you've got any advice to stop behaving like a baby. But how do you feel when Villa lose? Do you have this same kind of the end of the world doom and gloom feeling, or do you get over it pretty quickly?
I partly think in my head, no one's listening to the podcast this week. You do tend to notice more people listen when we win. I guess, I do take it quite badly. Like, I'll be sat there just sort of glumly in a sort of miserable mood for an hour or so, but I don't let it sort of impact me too much. And when we win, which has been quite a lot recently, which is very nice, I do get an extra skip in my step. And what tends to happen is I'll say to my girlfriend, like, "Oh, do you know, I think we should go for a drink to celebrate." And then if we lose, I'm like, "I think maybe we should go for a drink. Just, I don't know, just to get over it." So either way, it usually involves a drink after.
Drink responsibly.
Also drink responsibly, please do. Particularly when Villa win. I have not always done that, so definitely do drink responsibly. But yeah, I think when we win, it definitely like lifts my whole weekend. But when we lose, I think I've got to the point now where I'm able to compartmentalize it and be like, right, let's just move on, watch a film, watch a comedy show, anything that just makes me laugh, whatever, to sort of get over the sort of inner sulk that I actually want to be in.
This might be an interesting theory, Frankie, that only really applies to us. So, Rob, sit this phone out for a second. Do you think, and I've only just thought about this, do you think that maybe doing the podcast helps when it's a defeat? Because you kind of bookmark it. You kind of go, right, I've spoken about it now. I've dealt with it. I'm done. It might be the day of the game or the day after. I'm finished with it now. I can put it to bed. Do you think?
Yes, I think it absolutely does, because you're able to vocalize all these internal sort of emotions and feelings you have, and you can vocalize it, put it out there, and once you sort of putting all those emotions out into the world, and then it's just done, really. So I think you're absolutely right. I think once I've moaned about it on the podcast for 20 minutes or whatever, and then it suddenly just seems a bit better then after that.
I'd have sat on things for a bit, or maybe got involved in tweets over the course of a few days, still going back over it and things like that. Whereas when we win, I'd just do the podcast, stick it out, promote it, do it 2 or 3 times, do little clips and stuff like that, and really kind of go big for it. When we lose, it's like I'll press upload and almost forget it even existed. And I know people are watching it, but I'm like not bothered if they are or not really. Obviously I am, but like I'm not promoting it days after and still like, oh, go back and watch it, because I don't think anyone cares anyway. So for me, it's like, right, I press finish record, I press end stream, whatever, and I kind of go, right, I've dealt with that now. I've moved on. Whereas before the podcast, I think I probably did sit on things a little bit and fester a little bit after a defeat. It annoys me and it winds me up, and until I get it out of my system with the podcast, like if we have to wait till the following day, kind of start to forget about it, and I'll talk about it and bring it all out again. And then when I finish it, I'm like, right, it's done now. I'll forget about it. I forget that game even happened almost.
Sometimes life's easier when we're consistently rubbish because you just become anaesthetised to it a little bit. And now we're going into games and there's things riding on it. Previously, or at least in fairly recent history, when we've gone into games with something riding on it, it's usually been because we're bad and we're fighting relegation. And so it's hugely disappointing to get beat, and it puts us into further trouble, and you're kind of expecting it anyway. Whereas now it's the other way around of, well, we need to win to keep pace at the top of the league. And so if we don't, you get the double disappointment of, like, not only didn't we win, but we should have, because on paper, this lot of rubbish. Becoming a parent has helped me not quite have the same extremities of mood swing based on football results. That may change as my little girl gets more into it. I think certainly the viewing figures of the BBC's highlights programme go up and down by one, depending on whether we've won or not.
So our advice is, yours, Rob, is it's changed since you had a baby, but this guy's already got kids, so that's out the window. So our advice is start a podcast, maybe. Start a Villa podcast. Have a moan on YouTube or whatever for 20 minutes. And honestly, you'll feel better for it. You'll forget all about it. You can compartmentalize it and go, right, it's done now. I've spoken about it. Let's move on. Let's go and win the next game. Let's call it a day there. It's been a great recording session with you both. Let me have that off you. Rob, thank you so much for joining me, and Frankie, likewise as well. We're recording this on a Friday night, so thanks for sparing your time. I like doing things like this because it's fun to do. We enjoy doing things like this, but it takes you down so many different avenues and so many different talking points that, like we said, we started talking about FIFA and Football Manager saves, and then did it with advice to start a podcast because you hate losing. It's all over the place, and I love that.
We missed my confession about how I almost killed Santa Claus at Villa Park, but we'll save that for another podcast.
Stay tuned for part 3 then for confessions. I mean, we still haven't got loads more we could do, to be honest. So if people want it, give it another couple of months and we'll do it. Thank you everyone for watching this one on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We greatly appreciate you tuning into everything we do. Thanks to you for being pretty well behaved for the last 5 minutes or so. We'll see you all on the next one in a few days.